Now by the time he's a junior, guess what? He's the best player in America. As an 18-year-old guy, he was an afterthought recruit. People lose sight of the fact that kids at age 50, that may be as good as they're ever going to be. We all know, we all had kids, and sometimes kids mature early, but that's as good as they get. All this outside pressure that's put on the kids to be the next the next Michael Jordan. You know, Michael Jordan didn't start in basketball as a sophomore. I'll tell you a Michael Jordan story. And we talk about out of the box. Michael Jordan, as a junior in high school, is not really that known as a big recruit. He's from Wilmington, North Carolina. He's spotted and really starts to make his move between his junior and senior year in high school at the 5-star basketball camp and gets recruited by North Carolina. He came to North Carolina, and that year, they eventually win the national championship, but on Sports Illustrated, they had 5 people on the cover of Sports Illustrated preseason basketball. 4 players and Dean Smith. You know who wasn't on the cover? Michael Jordan. Wasn't even on the cover, okay? He eventually hits the shot, wins the game. But let me take you back 1 year from the time that he hit that shot. I'm doing in Wichita, Kansas, the McDonald's All-American game. Michael makes that team. That night, he set the record that was just recently broken of points scored in the McDonald's All-American game. But he didn't win the MVP award. Later that evening, I'm walking down the street in Wichita, and this lady across the street starts hollering at me. My son should have won it! And I don't have any idea who she is. And she has a guy walking right with him. It turned out to be Michael's mom and dad. And I calmed her down. I said, hey, look, you know, I realize he didn't win that award. It's not the end of his life. You know, don't worry. He's going to North Carolina. He'll be a good player there. He's going to play for Dean Smith. And we go and get a cup of coffee. And I finally get her calmed down because as far as she's concerned, that's the worst thing ever happened in his life. He didn't win the McDonald's All-American Award, okay? Now just think of what he's accomplished, all right? We need to get kids back in perspective on this higher level of recruitment. That is the biggest negative. As far as the positives, kids are bigger, faster, smarter, better kids. They want to play, but they just don't go through the natural maturation process, in my estimation, to understand the game and appreciate it for what it is.
Billy, Lang Kennedy is my name. I'm athletic director at Kent State, and I've had the honor and privilege of being around the NCAA basketball tournament, and you and working with Jim Nantz, you're the best. And I have a question. In all your years, what has been the greatest game you've ever called?
You know, the greatest game I ever called was not in the NCAA tournament. The best game I ever called, and I want to, and this is important too in where we are right now. You got to remember, the NCAA tournament. Now we talk about, you know, can Cleveland State get in? Can Michigan get in? You know, back in the days of when the NCAA tournament was in my era in college, and many years thereafter, you had to win your conference championship in order to get in the NCAA tournament. And so the greatest game that I ever broadcast, because it was the game that in effect changed the rule to allow multiple teams from conferences to go in, and a guy named Wayne Duke, who was the great Big Ten commissioner here, is the guy that, along with Willis Casey, were the 2 guys that really changed how it works today and made it much better. The tournament would be nothing compared to without what they did. But that game was Maryland against NC State. And put it in perspective. I mean, you played all year long. When I was in college, you played all year long to win the conference championship, regular season. And then you had to go to Raleigh, and you had to win the next 3 games. And if you didn't win those 3 games, even if you were undefeated in regular season, you didn't go in the NCAA tournament. You had to be your conference champion. So you start talking about pressure. And I'll throw something else out. My sophomore year, I didn't understand the pressure. I didn't really understand the challenge. I didn't understand that, hey, you know what? This is the last game your guys are ever going to play together. You know, you gotta get that. When you go to work each day, you gotta understand that this may be the last time we're going to work together. So damn it, let's pull together, have fun, and make it work. And so back in those days, you really didn't understand that as a sophomore. But boy, when you lost, as we lost in the championship my sophomore year, you knew when you were a junior. As a matter of fact, when we got to play for the championship in our junior year, our coach, that same guy, Bones McKinney, had a little talk to our team, and then he left the locker room. And he said to our captain, a guy named Jerry Steele, who was a sub, Jerry, I want you to talk to the team. And Jerry's speech, I can remember like it's happening right now, was so unbelievable that we hit the door. Unbeknown to us, our coach had locked it from the other side, okay? Now, we had big guys. They drove the door right through. They went right through and crushed the door, and one of the guy I played ball with, the other guard, unfortunately hit a water tank and never could play. Bones didn't even realize he wasn't there for the game, okay? But that's how fired up we were, okay? So back to your question. Maryland and NC State and UCLA were, NC State was ranked #1 in the nation, UCLA #2 with Bill Walton, and Maryland #3. They were the 3 best teams in the country. UCLA is getting in. They've won their conference championship. But that night going on the floor in Greensboro, North Carolina, of those 2 teams ranked 1 and 3 in the nation, only one of them were going to be able to play in the postseason. And it was one of the greatest games I've ever seen. Of those 10 guys that started that game, 9 played in the NBA eventually. David Thompson, of course, everybody knows, one of the great players in the history of college basketball. But Tommy Burleson, Lenny Elmore, John Lucas. I mean, they're just incredible players. Tommy Burleson. And they played a game, and I'll remember this, with about 6 minutes to go, because I had broadcast so many games between those 2 teams. And I'm broadcasting that game with a guy named Jim Thacker. And I say to Jim, I don't want the game to ever end. You know, because it's not fair that one group of these kids are going nowhere. And it did. It went into overtime, and as you know, NC State won, and then they went on and won the national championship, beating UCLA in the semifinals, and then Al McGuire's Marquette team. But that's the greatest game that I have ever seen in college.
Billy, my name's Doug Neary, and I just want to thank you for all the insights and inspirations you've given all of us basketball fans. I have a simple question, if there is such a thing as a simple question for you. Who is the wackiest coach you've ever come across, and what's the wackiest thing they've ever done? I guess that's 2 simple questions.
Well, you know, Bones was probably my college coach. You know, it's funny. I spent a lot of time with, you know, guys that were great players. Like, you know, I'll be with Bob in Vegas on our project, and like John Havlicek will be out there with us. And, you know, you always reminisce about different things that you did and so forth. But I would have to say that my coach was, and I consider it more, today it's more fun to think that I was around him than it is to think that we won championships, okay? I mean, and I'll give you an example. We played that same North Carolina team, and this was the first time Wake Forest had beaten them in a big game. I'm not talking about the championship game, but I'm talking about the regular season game. And we go over to play at the University of North Carolina. And it's a big deal. I mean, they're a hell of a team, and we're a top 10 team, and so this is going to be some game. Now, they had a guy named Frank McGuire. He was their coach. He was an immaculate dresser. He was from New York City, and he would come out in pregame warm-ups with a beautiful, and I'm talking, Chapel Hill used to be quite the center of fashion in the South. It was the, you know, and Frank would come out with a beautiful sport coat. And when he come out for the game, he would have on a beautiful suit. He would change, and for the game, he'd have a suit. And he always wore cufflinks, beautiful cufflinks. So we're playing North Carolina that particular night, and we're kicking their butt. And now with about 2 minutes to go, you know, we're happy, but the game's over. Hey, we've won. And so you're on the court, and you're ready to be substituted because, you know, the game is over. And all of a sudden, Bones McKinney calls a timeout. We don't need a timeout, you know, so you go over to the sidelines. I used to argue with him, which I was completely out of line, but, you know, that was part of the process, too. I had fun. Coach, what are you doing? He said, sit down. So we sit down, and he walks out to the court. And now he didn't own a pair of cufflinks, okay? He had one blazer, and, you know, being a Baptist minister, he had red socks or a blue sock or something. And so he starts going like this, as if he's fixing his cufflinks. And we realize what he's doing, but the fans are not appreciating it, okay? So we go back out on the court, and as soon as we get possession of the ball again, you know, after about 18 months, tie out. He goes, now he starts it again. Now he's messing with his tie. Now the fans get the picture, okay? This is trouble here. And now we know, hey, we're not going to get out of this place. There's going to be a war. He calls 3 timeouts. The third one, he walks into the stands and starts doing this, all right? Now you can imagine what the booing. I mean, the place was going crazy, okay? We got out of there alive. We drive back to Winston-Salem, which is about an hour-and-a-half ride, and we get back down. There's a Baptist school. Back in those days, the women's dorms were across the street. If you crossed, after dark, if you crossed that street, you could be dismissed from school. That's how strict the Baptist rules were, okay? We get back to the campus. We're all tired, and bus stops, and we go down, and we get our bags to take them back to the room, and we start walking up the steps there, and he said, I'll tell you one thing. When you whip Carolina's out, everybody get back on the bus.